In 1984, one of rock's most successful and notorious American solo artists released his 8th studio album. The album marked a slight departure from his previous hard rock sound and incorporated a more mature, more commercial appeal. Now, part of that appeal was the addition of an unknown vocalist who would himself become a beloved and legendary artist. You've almost certainly heard that singer in other situations, but this is really where he got his start. Hi, I'm Robert John Hatfield, vinyl junkie and garbage pit of useless information. Real quick, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and leave your comments and memories. And don't forget to visit our sponsor, audiomover.com, and transfer your personal audio and videotapes to digital. Now, the album I want to talk about today is the album Penetrator by Ted Nugent. This is an often overlooked album in Ted Nugent's career. Now, I have to be honest with you. I'm a big Ted Nugent fan. He's always been a polarizing character, and that's kind of been part of his appeal. You know, like many people, I was introduced to him as a young teenager. I ordered a cassette tape of Double Live Gonzo from one of those 10 tapes for a penny Columbia House promotions. Remember those? And I listened to that tape in my Walkman over and over, walking to school when I was in junior high. And if you could take the immature, pubescent, testosterone-driven energy of a 13-year-old boy and put it in the body of a rock star, it would be Ted Nugent in the 1970s. I still remember on that album hearing him talking about his guitar, saying that it could blow the balls off a charging rhino at 60 paces. The music, the energy, and the attitude was hilariously perfect for a teenage boy. And when he appeared on Letterman in the early 80s, you realized he was actually a really funny guy with kind of the gift of gab. Once again, the perfect rock star for adolescent boys. Now, the first and only time I saw him in concert was years after his prime, and even a few years after this album. It was in 1988. He came to the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City, Utah, and only charged $5 per ticket. You know, he's always seen himself as a down-to-earth man of the people. After all, he's from Detroit. He's the Motor City madman. So $5 tickets actually seemed like what I would have expected from a guy like him, although it might have simply been to get people to show up. Anyway, so me and a bunch of buddies went to see him, and it was everything you would hope for in a Ted Nugent show. The crowd was 17,000 people strong. Once again, he was long past his prime, and yet for $5, there was plenty of people ready to go experience the Motor City Madman. The concert was loud and dripping with testosterone and sweat, complete with Ted Nugent jumping off the stage and getting in a fight with someone in the crowd. In other words, it was a near perfect rock concert. And I definitely liked Ted Nugent before that concert, but after that night, I was a believer. He was the real deal, uncompromising and unapologetic, exactly what hard rock is supposed to be. You know, I think a lot of us get so lost in the craziness of his music and his chaotic masculine energy that's really set the stage for his career. We tend to overlook the fact that he was, first of all, a master guitar player. He had chops and soul that really set him apart from almost all of his contemporaries. He played hollow body guitars that screamed with feedback and natural overdrive, and he had command of the fretboard like few others. But beyond that, and this is part of why I took this album out today, I loved Ted Nugent's singing voice. It had the same intense energy he brought to his guitar playing, but even so, he didn't use it very often. He used other singers on his music. One of his biggest hits, Stranglehold, wasn't sung by Ted Nugent. It was sung by a guy named Derek St. Holmes, who appeared on many of Nugent's albums, including Double Live Gonzo, the album that I mentioned before. Well, in 1984, when I was on one of my normal trips to the record store, I saw this album. I'd never seen it before, so I figured it had to be new. Of course, by 1984, Ted Nugent's popularity had waned dramatically. As a matter of fact, because of some troubled business decisions and poor money management by his handlers, he was, for all intents and purposes, broke when they released the album before this one. And this album appeared to be an attempt to create something perhaps a little more commercial, move into the 1980s, create something a little more polished and mature to get back in a sustainable position with his career. As I said, I was a Ted Nugent fan, so I bought this record, and to be honest, I really loved it. So let's look at the cover for a moment. I actually thought this was such an interesting, cool cover, having this tattoo that winded down and then it turned into a real dragon and was biting this person's arm. I thought this was pretty cool. This is actually from a larger painting by a fantasy artist named Boris Vallejo. The full painting shows a man in jeans and a shredded shirt holding a chain that kind of wraps around his backside. But this cover itself was a massive change for Ted Nugent. This was the first album cover that didn't feature a picture of Ted Nugent. Now, whether that was intentional or not, that change was a symbolic representation of entering a new phase in his career. Now, if you flip the album over, we see also something just a little bit different. Although it's definitely Ted, he's lost the hollow body guitars for something that looks to me a little bit like it's probably a Fender Telecaster. And then over here on the right, you just have the song list. So let's go ahead and take a look inside. So this right here is exactly what you expect to see from Ted Nugent. Here he is again, kind of what we were used to seeing from him. You know, he's got these weird suspenders and this hollow body guitar and just looking like he's like he's playing a live show and being a little crazy like he always was. But I want to show you some interesting things about the people who played on this album. So if you look over here, and by the way, we film all these videos in 4K. So if you're watching on YouTube especially, you have an option down there to change the resolution, and you can change your settings to watch this in as high resolution as your monitor will allow. And if you go to a 4K television, a 4K monitor, and watch these things there, you should be able to see all the detail that we're seeing here. So as you go down this list of people that appeared on the album, the first, of course, guitars, 6-string bass, and lead vocals, Ted Nugent. But next on bass, you have a guy named Doug Lubin. Who is Doug Lubin? Well, he had actually played on the Doors' second album, Strange Days. Now, of course, you know, what a lot of people don't know about the Doors, you know, you see the guys on stage and you don't see a bass player. That Ray Manzarek, who's the keyboard player, generally played the bass lines just with his left hand on the keyboard, the organ he was playing. Well, what a lot of people don't know is that they would bring a bass player into the studio to play along with Ray Manzarek to kind of enhance those bass notes. And so on that the album I just mentioned, Doug Lubin came in and was actually that bass player. But even more interestingly, as you go down this list of people that played on this album, Doug Lubin on bass, Bobby Chenard on drums, and Alan St. John on keyboards. This is actually Billy Squier's band. If you go look at the album Emotions in Motion and you look at the people in his band, this is it. And so Ted Nugent, this is a couple years after Emotions in Motion, but Ted Nugent is actually using basically Billy Squier's band on this album. But if you look down here under Alan St. John, we get to the person that I really wanted to talk about, and that is Brian Howe. This album was the first time most of us ever heard of Brian Howe. And when I heard the first song on this album, Tied Up in Love, I was hooked. His voice was pure, powerful, and what a vocal range. And if you don't know, a few years later, Brian Howe became the replacement vocalist for Bad Company. And that's where he really became well known. And I wasn't following Bad Company very closely at the time. They'd also kind of slowed down a little bit, especially with Paul Rodgers going off with Jimmy Page to start the firm. But then Bad Company started taking off, and you'll remember the song Holy Water. And when I first heard the song Holy Water, I instantly knew who it was. I thought, wait, that's the guy from Ted Nugent's album. Brian Howe's voice is unmistakable. And this album, in my opinion, is Brian Howe at his best. If you haven't heard the song Tied Up in Love from this album, listen to it. As a matter of fact, even though Ted does sing some of the songs on this album, most of it is sung by Brian Howe. And if you're a Brian Howe fan, you'll probably love especially the entire first side of this album. Now, but there are a couple of more notable credits on the album. Look at the name right below Brian Howe. You'll see percussion and sequences, Peter Wolf. Do you know who that is? Peter Wolf is the singer from the Jay Giles Band. Remember the song Love Stinks, Centerfold, Freeze Frame? Yep, that Peter Wolf. And he's doing percussion and sequences, which normally meant at the time some sort of drum machine or accents that were timed up or sequenced with the recording. And there's one other interesting credit on this album, and I'll show you when we look inside. And it is here we go. It's the second song on side 1. And it's this song that says, "Where do you draw the line?" And you'll see under there the names Adams and Valance. Now, if you don't know, this is one of the most successful songwriting duos ever. Bryan Adams and Jim Valance. And yes, that's the One Night Love Affair, Run to You, Summer of '69, Heaven, Bryan Adams. And one of his songs found his way onto a Ted Nugent album. Actually, this song, "Where Do You Draw the Line?" was originally intended for a Bryan Adams solo album, but after he recorded it, it didn't make the cut. And later, Ted Nugent picked it up for this album. Now, Ted only sang 4 of the songs on this album, but one of them became one of my all-time favorite Ted Nugent songs. And even though much of this album was a departure from his adolescent, testosterone-ridden, sometimes funny songs, the first song on the second side was a tip of the hat to the style that we had all grown to love. The adolescent, tongue-in-cheek humor that gave us songs like Cat Scratch Fever, Wango Tango, Wang Dang Sweet, you know the song. That was alive and well here too. And it was the first song on side 2, called Thunder Thighs. It's a hilariously non-politically correct song, and honestly, it could have just as easily been released on a comedy album. His singing style, the lyrics, it's hard not to laugh. And if you enjoyed that non-politically correct Ted Nugent sense of humor, it's a total classic. You know, this album didn't really bring him back into the mainstream, but it showed his ability to create something more mature and polished, a skill that would really blossom a few years later with Damn Yankees, when he, along with Tommy Shaw from Styx and Jack Blades from Night Ranger, would create a commercial masterpiece. But with the introduction of Brian Howe to the world and Ted's tasteful, amazing guitar playing and some really good songs, this album is an important part of the Ted Nugent legacy. Hey, if you like these videos right now, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and of course, leave your comments and memories down below in the comments. And don't forget also to visit audiomover.com, where you can get your personal old audio and video tapes converted to digital. And with that, have a fantastic day.